Friday marks 20 years since Russian President Vladimir Putin first came to power. The summer of '99 had Bill Clinton as US president, and Christina Aguilera was topping the charts with Genie in a Bottle. The digital world as we know it was in its infancy, and relations with the West were nothing like today. Reuters' Andrew Osborne in Moscow.
Back then, Mr. Putin's relations with the West were very different. In fact, there was even a honeymoon period. After 9/11 in 2001 and the attacks on the Twin Towers, Mr. Putin was one of the first to call then President Bush and offer his sympathy. And not just words, he backed up those words with concrete help in Afghanistan against the Taliban. And he also allowed the United States to establish a military presence in Central Asia. Central Asia, traditionally regarded by Russia as its own backyard. So relations back then very different from how they are now. Things soured very quickly, however. Mr. Putin was opposed to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. He was very unhappy when the United States left a key arms control treaty and ordered Russia to build up its own nuclear weapons. And he's been very unhappy ever since with what he regards as NATO's unacceptable expansion towards Russia's own borders. That issue has remained one of the big problems between Russia and the West.
10 years later, the same year we first saw Putin shirtless on horseback, Hillary Clinton presented Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov with this gift, the infamous reset button, supposed to reset their relationship, maybe be friends again. It didn't work. Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea in 2014. The West imposed sanctions. Flash forward to allegations of election meddling, and the rest is history. It's now hard to imagine that there was once a time when a US president, namely George Bush, affectionately referred to the Russian leader as Pooty-Poot. The home front also saw radical change.
The internet and mobile phones have really taken a real hold in Russia. That has posed somewhat of a challenge for Mr. Putin and his allies, because previously state news, Russian state news, that's where most people here get their information, even now. But that now has a competitor in the form of internet. So there is a divide here. Many Russians think, yes, it's been great, our living standards have improved under Mr. Putin, even though they've slipped in recent years when we've seen falling real incomes. But there are other older Russians in particular, and indeed some young Russians, who look back and know about the 1990s and think that was actually a chance for freedom. Mr. Putin came to power, and really those early hopes of democracy and of freedom of speech, of freedom of the media that did briefly exist, that those hopes were snuffed out.